The cold seeped through the threadbare wool of her tunic, a familiar enemy that lived in the marrow of her bones. Lyra knelt on the stone floor of the great hall, the rough bristles of her brush scraping rhythmically against the grime. Each pass was a prayer for invisibility, a desperate plea to fade into the gray stone until she was nothing more than a shadow. Her world was a cage of cold, hunger, and the sharp, biting scent of her pack's disdain. She was Lyra, the Omega, the wolfless, a broken thing in a world that worshipped strength. A heavy boot slammed into her ribs, sending a spiderweb of agony through her torso. She gasped, curling into herself as the brush clattered away. "Filth!" Alpha Marcus snarled, his voice a low growl that vibrated with casual cruelty. He was the ruler of the Blood Moon Pack, a brute whose power was measured in the fear he inspired. "You missed a spot. Do it again, or you don't eat for a week." Lyra didn't look up. Looking up was a challenge, and a challenge earned a beating. She simply nodded, her hair falling like a curtain to hide the hot tears stinging her eyes. "Yes, Alpha," she whispered to the floor, her voice hoarse from disuse. From across the hall, she heard the tinkling laughter of his daughter, Ilara. Ilara was everything Lyra was not. Beautiful, revered, the pack's prized beta female. Her scent was of wild roses and smug superiority. "Father, don't waste your breath on it," Ilara called, her tone dripping with saccharine poison. "The king arrives tomorrow. We have more important things to do than watch the Omega scrub floors." The king. The name hit Lyra like a physical blow. King Kalin, the alpha of alphas, the Shadow King, a legend whispered in terrified awe around campfires, a warrior king who had united the warring packs under a single, iron-fisted rule. They said his wolf was a monster born from a starless night, and his eyes burned with the cold fire of a dying sun. And he was coming here. A frantic, manic terror clawed at her throat. This was the one event she could not hide from. An Alpha King's visit mandated the presence of every pack member, from the highest Alpha to the lowest Omega. There would be no slipping away into the woods, no hiding in the cold cellar beneath the kitchens. She would be seen. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Because Lyra was not wolfless. She had a secret, a catastrophic truth she chained deep inside her soul. It was a hurricane locked in a glass jar, a raging inferno she smothered daily beneath a cloak of meekness. Her mother, with her dying breath, had placed a small, cool moonstone on a leather cord around her neck. "Never take this off, my love," she had whispered, her eyes wide with a fear Lyra hadn't understood then. "It hides you. It keeps you safe. What you are, they will fear it. They will try to destroy it." What she was an impossibility. She was the last of her line, the final carrier of a bloodline thought to be extinct for 1,000 years. She was a lunar scion. Her wolf was not of flesh and blood and primal instinct. It was a creature of myth, a being of pure moonlight and ancient power, the Argent Wolf, the bringer of balance, the one true mate to the Shadow King's celestial opposite. The charm her mother gave her didn't just hide her scent, it suppressed her wolf entirely, making her appear broken, wolfless. It was a cage that kept the hurricane from breaking free, a cage that had saved her life, but condemned her to a living hell. The king's arrival felt like the coming of an apocalypse. He was the other half of the prophecy she'd only ever read about in a scorched book her mother had hidden. Sun and moon, shadow and light. His presence, his raw cosmic power, would be like a tidal wave against the fragile dam of her mother's charm. She felt a tremor of fear, but beneath it, something else stirred. A deep, resonant hum within her, a sleeping giant stirring from a long slumber. Her hidden wolf, so long dormant, felt the approach of its counterpart. It was a terrifying, exhilarating sensation, a whisper of a power so immense it could level the entire packhouse. She finished scrubbing the floor under Marcus's hateful gaze, her body aching with a familiar, dull pain. She retreated to her room, a damp, windowless closet in the cellar that smelled of earth and mildew. She huddled on a pile of rags that served as her bed, her fingers tracing the smooth, cold surface of the moonstone hidden beneath her tunic. It felt warmer than usual. The next day, the air itself changed. It grew heavy, charged with an electric energy that made the hairs on Lyra's arms stand on end. The scent hit first, a powerful, intoxicating aroma of ancient forests, crackling ozone, and something uniquely, lethally male. It was the scent of absolute power. King Kaelin had arrived. From her place at the very back of the assembled pack, hidden behind werewolves twice her size, Lyra risked a glance. He was more than the legends claimed. He stood over 6.5 feet tall, a mountain of muscle and lethal grace poured into fine black leathers. His hair was as dark as a raven's wing, and his face was a masterpiece of harsh, masculine beauty, as if carved from granite by a wrathful god. And his eyes, they were molten gold. They swept over the crowd with an unnerving intensity, a predator assessing a field of lesser creatures. He wasn't just an alpha, he was the apex of their kind, radiating an aura so potent it forced everyone, even Alpha Marcus, to bow their heads in submission. Beside him stood his beta, a severe-looking man named Lucian, whose eyes missed nothing. Lyra tried to shrink herself, to become smaller than a mouse, to disappear. But the king's scent was a physical thing, wrapping around her, seeping into her senses. It called to the chained hurricane inside her, and the storm began to rage. The moonstone against her skin grew hotter, almost burning. The king's golden eyes stopped their sweep. They narrowed, focusing, his head tilted, like a wolf catching a scent on the wind. An impossible scent. A scent that had been lost for a millennium. He took a step forward, his gaze raking the back of the crowd where she was hiding. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound that was pure, possessive instinct. "What is that scent?" he demanded, his voice a deep baritone that commanded absolute obedience. It was not a question, it was a pronouncement. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced Lyra's heart. He smelled her, through the charm, through the crowd, through 1,000 years of history. He smelled her. Alpha Marcus stepped forward, bowing low. "Your Majesty? I do not understand. You smell only the members of the Blood Moon Pack." "I smell moonlight," the king corrected, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I smell silver fire, and it is being hidden from me." His eyes locked onto the exact spot where Lyra was trying to merge with the shadows. For a terrifying second she felt seen, pinned, known. Her wolf, her beautiful, terrible argent wolf, howled in its cage, rattling the bars with a strength she'd never felt before. The moonstone flared with a desperate, painful heat. But the moment passed. The king's gaze moved on, a flicker of confusion and frustration crossing his face, before it was replaced by his usual mask of cold authority. The charm held. Barely. Lyra's knees felt weak with relief. She had survived. The Feast of Unity began that evening. The great hall, the same one she had scrubbed on her hands and knees, was now filled with roaring fires, long tables laden with roasted meats, and the boisterous energy of the pack. She was tasked with serving, a ghost moving along the edges of the celebration, refilling goblets and clearing away bones. Her eyes kept straying to the high table, where King Kaelin sat like a dark god on a throne. He ate little, drank less. His golden eyes were constantly scanning the room, hunting. He was a predator, and he knew his prey was near. Every time his gaze swept in her direction, the moonstone burned, and she had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. Alara was seated near the king, preening and posturing. She wore a gown of deep crimson that clung to her curves, and she laughed too loudly at everything the king's beta said, trying desperately to catch Kaelin's attention. But he ignored her completely. His focus was elsewhere, on the ghost of a scent that promised him everything. This blatant dismissal fueled Alara's simmering rage. Her eyes, sharp and cruel, found Lyra as she bent to clear a plate. A malicious idea, born of jealousy and spite, bloomed in her mind. She stood up, tapping her silver goblet for attention. The hall quieted. "Your Majesty," Ilara began, her voice sweet as honeyed venom. "To honor your visit, we thought to provide some special entertainment, a performance of the ancient dance of the moons." A confused murmur went through the crowd. The Dance of the Moons was a sacred ritual, a legend. It was said only the one true Luna, a she-wolf with the blood of the moon goddess herself, could perform it correctly. For anyone else, it was not only impossible, but blasphemous. King Kaelin's expression remained unreadable, but a flicker of interest lit his golden eyes. "A bold claim. Who among you possesses such a lineage?" Alara's smile was a slash of triumph. She turned and pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at Lyra. "Her," she announced, her voice ringing with false piety. "Our humble Omega, Lyra. She claims to have the gift." The world stopped. Every eye in the hall turned to Lyra. The weight of their collective gaze was a physical force, crushing her. Alpha Marcus looked shocked for a moment, then a cruel understanding dawned on his face. This was the ultimate humiliation, forcing the wolfless Omega to perform a sacred dance she couldn't possibly know in front of the Alpha King himself. It was a joke of apocalyptic proportions. "Is this true?" The king's voice cut through the stunned silence. It was not directed at Alara, but at Lyra. It held a strange, dangerous hope. Lyra couldn't speak. Her throat was closed tight with terror. She shook her head, a small, desperate gesture. "Don't be modest, little mouse," Alara cooed, striding towards her. She grabbed Lyra's arm, her nails digging into her skin like talons. "She's just shy, Your Majesty." She dragged Lyra from the shadows and shoved her into the center of the hall. The space cleared around them, forming a circle of expectant, mocking faces. The pack wolves began to snicker, anticipating the pathetic display. "Dance!" Alara hissed in her ear, her breath hot with malice. "Or my father will have you whipped until you can't stand." Lyra stood frozen, trapped. The king's golden eyes burned into her, not with mockery, but with an intensity that stripped her soul bare. He was waiting, watching. Alpha Marcus gave a curt nod to the pack musicians. A slow, haunting melody began to play on a lone flute, the ancient notes of the moon ritual. The tune resonated deep within Lyra, in a place her fear couldn't touch. It was a song her soul knew, a melody her blood remembered. Her mother's warning echoed in her mind. They will try to destroy it, but another voice, the primal howl of her caged wolf, screamed a different word. Mine. It was his voice, the king's. Not spoken aloud, but a telepathic roar that slammed into her mind, the first half of the sacred mate bond demanding its completion. Her wolf answered with a force that shattered her control. The moonstone around her neck cracked. A hairline fracture appeared on its surface, and a sliver of pure silver light escaped. It was invisible to most, but the king saw it. His eyes widened, his body going rigid. Lyra's body began to move. It was not her own volition. It was instinct. It was blood memory. Her bare feet began to trace the ancient patterns of the dance on the cold stone floor. Her arms, usually held tight to her sides in a posture of submission, rose gracefully, her hands carving symbols of power into the air. The snickering in the hall died, replaced by a confused silence. This was not the clumsy, pathetic flailing they had expected. She moved with an ethereal grace, a sorrowful beauty that captivated them. The king rose slowly from his throne, his golden eyes locked on her. He took a step forward, then another. The scent of ozone and ancient forest intensified, wrapping around her like a protective cloak. The music swelled, and Lyra's movements became faster, more desperate. She was no longer just dancing, she was fighting. She was channeling a power that had been suppressed for 18 years, and it was tearing her apart. The crack in the moonstone widened. More silver light poured out, coalescing around her, making her worn tunic shimmer as if woven from starlight. Her eyes, usually a dull, frightened gray, began to glow with a soft, lunar luminescence. "What is this sorcery?" Alpha Marcus breathed, his face a mask of disbelief and growing fear. Ilara's triumphant smirk had vanished, replaced by a horrified scowl. "Stop it! I command you to stop this mockery!" But Lyra couldn't stop. The power had her now. The song of her soul was calling to his. She spun, a final, desperate pirouette, and as she did, the moonstone exploded. It didn't make a sound. It simply disintegrated into a cloud of silver dust. The cage was broken. The hurricane was free. An apocalyptic wave of pure, untamed power erupted from her. It was not the earthy primal power of a normal wolf. This was cosmic. It was divine. It smelled of moonlight, of silver fire, of a power older than the forests and mountains. A collective gasp, like the wind being stolen from every lung in the hall, echoed off the stone walls. Lyra's body arched back, a silent scream tearing from her throat as the Argent Wolf, her true self, manifested. It was not a physical shift. It was something far more terrifying and beautiful. A colossal, spectral wolf made of solidified moonlight formed around her, its paws resting on the floor as it towered over the assembled pack. Its fur shimmered with the light of 1,000 stars, and its eyes were twin full moons. It threw back its head and howled. The sound was not of this world. It was the music of the spheres, a cry of pure celestial power that shattered every goblet in the hall and extinguished every torch, plunging the room into darkness. But it was not dark. Lyra herself was the light. She shone with a brilliant silver radiance, her eyes now glowing with the same impossible lunar light as the spectral wolf that surrounded her. The raw, divine energy rolling off her in waves forced every wolf in the room, including Alpha Marcus and a shrieking Ilara, to their knees. It was an involuntary submission to a power they could not comprehend. All but one. King Kalen stood bathed in her silver light, his own formidable aura roaring to life in response. A shadow coalesced around him, the manifestation of his own legendary wolf, a creature of pure, starless night. Where her light was calm and ethereal, his was a vortex of raw, kinetic energy, shadow and light, sun and moon. Their powers met in the center of the room, not in a clash, but in a perfect resonant harmony that made the very stones of the castle hum. The spectral Argent Wolf lowered its massive head, its moon-like eyes meeting the king's burning gold. And then, in front of the entire pack, in front of his beta, in front of her tormentors, the feared Alpha King, the Shadow King who had never bowed to anyone, did the unthinkable. He knelt. He went down on one knee, his head bowed, his entire being radiating a worshipful awe that was more potent than any command he had ever given. One word left his lips, spoken with the reverence of a prayer and the finality of a death sentence. A word that sealed Lyra's fate and condemned her enemies. Mine. The silence that followed was absolute, a profound void where fear and awe converged. Lyra stood in the epicenter of her own cataclysm, the spectral form of the Argent Wolf slowly dissolving back into her, leaving her bathed in a soft, residual light. The power still thrummed beneath her skin, a wild, magnificent beast finally awakened. It was terrifying. It was glorious. Her glowing eyes met the king's. He was still kneeling, his golden gaze fixed on her with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. There was no coldness in them now, only a feral, possessive fire and a deep, soul-shattering reverence. He was looking at her not as an omega, not as a joke, but as his other half, his salvation, his queen. He rose to his feet with a fluid grace that belied his size. The shadows of his own power still clung to him, making him seem like a figure from a dark myth. He closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, ignoring the stunned and terrified wolves still forced to their knees by the lingering pressure of her divine aura. He stopped just before her, his sheer presence a wall of heat and power. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a fraction of a second before his fingers gently, reverently, brushed a strand of hair from her face. The brief contact sent a jolt of pure energy through her, a circuit finally completed. The bond between them flared to life, a supernova in her soul. "They hurt you," he stated, his voice a low, lethal rumble. It was not a question. He could feel the echoes of her pain through the new bond, the years of abuse, the loneliness, the despair. His golden eyes darkened, the pupils expanding until they were almost black, a promise of apocalyptic retribution. Lyra found her voice, though it was a trembling whisper. What are you?" "I am Kaelin," he said, his voice softening only for her. "And you are my Luna, the other half of my soul that I have searched for across centuries." His gaze lifted from her face, sweeping over the kneeling pack members. The cold authority returned, magnified 1,000 times. His eyes landed on Alpha Marcus and Alara, who were trembling, their faces pale with abject terror. "Lucian!" Kaelin commanded, his voice cracking like a whip. His beta, who had managed to rise to one knee, bowed his head. "Your Majesty." "Seize the alpha of this pack and his daughter," the king ordered, his tone devoid of any emotion save for a chilling, precise fury. "Put them in irons. They will await their judgment." "No!" Alara shrieked, scrambling backward. "Father, do something." Alpha Marcus tried to rise, to assert his authority in his own hall, but the king merely glanced at him. The pressure of his aura slammed Marcus back to the floor like a physical blow. "Move," Kaelin commanded. The word was an alpha command of such magnitude that it bypassed all thought. The pack warriors, including Marcus's own enforcers, moved instantly to obey, their bodies responding to a higher authority. They hauled a screaming Alara and a sputtering, terrified Marcus to their feet, binding their hands with brutal efficiency. Kaelin turned his back on them, his attention returning solely to Lyra. He shrugged off his heavy, fur-lined cloak and draped it over her thin shoulders. It was warm and impossibly soft, enveloping her in his scent of forest and ozone. It felt like a shield. It felt like home. "You are cold," he murmured, his hands lingering on her shoulders. "You will never be cold again. I swear it." He led her away from the center of the hall, the pack parting before them like the sea before a god. He guided her toward the high table, toward the throne he had vacated. He did not sit. Instead, he led her to the dais and gently urged her to take the seat. Lyra hesitated, looking at the ornate carved throne. It was a seat of power, a place she had only ever scrubbed the floor around. "It is your seat," Kaelin said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. The Luna's throne has remained empty for 500 years. It has waited for you. She sank into the chair, the dark wood cool against her back. From this vantage point, she could see the entire hall, the faces of the wolves who had scorned her, beaten her, and laughed at her. They were all staring at her now, their expressions a mixture of terror and disbelief. She was no longer Lyra the Omega. She was a being of immense power, the chosen mate of their king. The shift in status was so abrupt, so total, it gave her vertigo. Kaelin stood beside her, a formidable guardian. He addressed the silent, kneeling pack. For 18 years, the Blood Moon Pack has harbored a sacred treasure, he announced, his voice ringing with power. And for 18 years, you have abused it. You have starved it. You have treated it like filth. His gaze was accusatory, each word a hammer blow of shame. Your alpha and his daughter will answer for their crimes at dawn. As for the rest of you, he paused, letting the fear build. Your fate will be decided by your new Luna. He turned his head slightly, his golden eyes meeting hers. He was giving her the power, the choice, the vengeance, if she wanted it. Lyra looked at the faces below her. She saw the ones who had actively tormented her, the ones who had laughed, and the vast majority who had simply looked away, who had allowed her suffering through their indifference. Her heart, so long accustomed to pain, felt a surge of something new, not hatred, not even anger. It was a profound, aching sorrow for the girl who had scrubbed these floors, followed by a cold, clear sense of justice. She was a queen now, and a queen had a duty. The transfer from the great hall to the royal suite reserved for the king was a blur. One moment she was on the Luna's throne, the next Kaelin had swept her into his arms and carried her from the room as if she weighed nothing. He moved with a predatory silence, his loyal beta, Lucian, clearing the path ahead. The suite was larger than the entire cellar she had called home. A fire roared in a massive stone hearth, casting a warm, golden glow over rich tapestries and plush furs. It was a cocoon of warmth and luxury, a world away from the cold stones and damp rags that had defined her existence. Kaelin set her down gently on a soft bearskin rug before the fire. He knelt before her, taking her small, chapped hands in his large, calloused ones. His touch was surprisingly gentle, a stark contrast to the lethal power that radiated from him. "I failed you," he said, his voice rough with self-recrimination. "My soul should have recognized yours the moment I entered this territory. The charm she wore, it was powerful. Ancient magic." Lyra looked down at their joined hands. His were nearly twice the size of hers, scarred and strong. "My mother gave it to me, to keep me safe." "She did," Kaelin agreed, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "In a world without me, it would have. But it also starved you. It suppressed your wolf, your very essence. That ends now." He explained everything then, his voice a low, mesmerizing cadence against the crackle of the fire. He told her of the prophecy, an ancient text that foretold the union of the Shadow King and the Argent Luna. Their joining was meant to usher in a new golden age, to restore the balance of their world which had been slowly decaying without its lunar half. The Argent Wolves were hunted to extinction 1,000 years ago by power-hungry alphas who feared their divine connection to the moon goddess. He explained, his eyes glowing with a cold fury. They feared a power they could not dominate. Your mother must have been the last, hiding her nature just as you did. It was a history she barely knew, a legacy she never understood. The scorched book her mother had left her contained fragments, but Kaelin filled in the vast empty spaces. She was not a freak. She was royalty of a kind more ancient and powerful than any alpha. Your power is not just for fighting, he continued, his gaze intense. It is the power of creation, of healing, of insight. You are the heart of our people, Lyra. I am merely its sword and shield. The weight of his words was immense, but strangely they did not crush her. Instead, they settled into the empty spaces inside her, filling her with a sense of purpose she had never known. The awakened wolf within her purred in agreement, recognizing the truth in his explanation. A soft knock came at the door. Lucian entered, bowing his head. Your Majesty, the prisoners are secured. The pack awaits its judgment. Kaelin's jaw tightened. He rose, pulling Lyra up with him. We will not delay. He looked down at her, his expression softening. You do not have to do this. I can dispense the justice you are owed. Lyra straightened her shoulders, the king's heavy cloak giving her a sense of borrowed strength. But the power thrumming inside her was her own. No, she said, her voice clear and steady. I will face them. I am their Luna. It is my right, and my duty. A fierce pride blazed in Kaelin's eyes. He nodded once, a gesture of profound respect. As you command. The tribunal was held in the pack's central square, under the cold light of the dawn. The entire Blood Moon pack was assembled, their faces grim. In the center of the square, chained to 2 wooden posts, were Alpha Marcus and a disheveled, weeping Alara. 2 thrones had been brought from the great hall and placed on a raised platform. Kaelin led Lyra to hers, and they sat, a united front of shadow and light. Lucian stepped forward, unrolling a scroll. He began to list the crimes, his voice clear and unforgiving. He spoke of the official laws of the United Packs, laws Marcus had broken, neglect of pack resources, hoarding of wealth. But then he moved on to the more personal crimes, the ones Kaelin had pulled from Lyra's own memories through the mate bond. For the systematic abuse, starvation, and endangerment of the blessed Luna, Lucian's voice rang out. The penalty is death. For blasphemy and the attempted public humiliation of a divine vessel, he continued, his gaze falling on Alara. The penalty is exile and the stripping of the wolf. Alara let out a choked sob. To have one's wolf forcibly severed was a fate worse than death. To be rendered a shell, unable to shift, to feel the pack bond, to feel anything but a hollow ache for the rest of one's life. Marcus finally found his voice, a desperate, pathetic roar. Lies! She is nothing. A wolfless runt we took in out of pity. You cannot believe this. This thing over me. Kaelin didn't even look at him. He looked at Lyra. My queen, he said, his voice soft enough for only her to hear, but the respect in it was a message to everyone. What is your judgment? Lyra stood. The morning sun caught in her hair, creating a silver halo. She looked at Marcus, the man who had beaten her, starved her, and treated her as less than dirt. She saw no remorse in his eyes, only defiant rage and fear. Alpha Marcus, she began, her voice amplified by the power resonating within her. It carried across the entire square, silencing all murmurs. You swore an oath to protect every member of your pack, from the strongest to the weakest. You failed. You used your strength not to build, but to break. For this, you are stripped of your title and your life is forfeit. A gasp went through the crowd. She had confirmed the king's sentence. She then turned to Alara, who was staring at her with wide, terrified eyes. The jealousy had been burned away, replaced by a primal fear. Ilara? Lyra said, her voice softening with a sliver of pity. You were cruel because you were weak. You saw kindness as a flaw and power as a weapon for your own vanity. You will be stripped of your wolf, as you tried to strip me of my dignity. You will live out your days in the wolfless lands to understand what it truly means to be alone. It was a sentence of perfect poetic justice. Kaelin rose and stood beside her. He gave a single, sharp nod. The royal guards moved in. Marcus roared and fought, a wild animal in a trap, but he was swiftly and efficiently dispatched. A collective shudder went through the pack. The old era was over. Ilara simply collapsed, sobbing, as a pack elder approached with the ceremonial silver knife used for the severing ritual. Lyra turned away. She had not enjoyed it, but she felt a sense of rightness, of balance restored. She looked out at the Blood Moon pack. They were now hers to lead. "The past is done," she declared, her voice ringing with a newfound authority. "Your old Alpha bred cruelty and fear. Your new Luna will foster strength and compassion. Loyalty will be rewarded. Cruelty will be punished. You have a chance to build a better pack. Do not waste it." She then turned to Kaelin. "I am tired," she whispered. "I know," he said, his voice gentle. He took her hand. "Let's go home." The journey to the capital was a revelation. They traveled in a royal carriage, but Lyra spent most of her time riding alongside Kaelin on a magnificent black mare. For the first time, she saw the world not as a place to hide from, but as a kingdom she was destined to rule. The land seemed to welcome her, the trees bowing in the wind, the rivers sparkling in the sun. Kaelin's capital, the Obsidian Citadel, was a breathtaking fortress carved into the heart of a mountain. It was a place of stark, formidable beauty, all black stone and soaring towers. Yet, as she rode through the gates at Kaelin's side, she could feel a listlessness in the city's spirit, a latent decay that Kaelin had spoken of. The kingdom lacked its heart. It lacked its moon. Her arrival was met with a mixture of awe and suspicion from the royal court. They saw a former Omega, a girl in borrowed finery, and they whispered behind their hands. But one look from their king, one flash of his possessive golden eyes as he stood by her side, was enough to silence them. The days that followed were a whirlwind of learning. Lyra devoured books on history, law, and the lore of her people. She discovered that her lunar powers were multifaceted. She could soothe agitated minds with a touch, encourage plants to grow with a whisper, and see glimpses of the future in pools of clear water. Kaelin was a patient teacher, a devoted partner who cherished her insights and celebrated every new discovery she made. Their bond was the anchor in this new life. It was a constant humming connection between their souls. She could feel his emotions as if they were her own, his fierce protectiveness, his boundless adoration, and the deep, centuries-old loneliness that she was finally healing. He, in turn, drew strength from her light, the shadows in his own soul receding in her presence. But not everyone in the Obsidian Citadel was pleased with the new Luna. There was a shadow in the court, a discontent that festered in the dark corners of the palace. Kaelin's cousin, Lord Vorlog, was a man of sharp smiles and cold eyes. He was the head of the royal council, a position of immense power. He had always been publicly loyal, but Lyra's intuition, now honed by her lunar senses, screamed that he was a viper. She felt his resentment like a physical chill whenever he was near. He had hoped Kaelin would never find his mate, or that the king would be forced into a political marriage with a noble from a family Vorlag could control. Lyra, the prophesied Luna with her own divine power, was a catastrophic disruption to his secret ambitions. One evening, Kaelin was called away to the northern border to settle a sudden and suspicious dispute between two vassal packs. "I will be gone 3 days at most," he promised, his hands cupping her face. The thought of leaving her was a visible torment in his eyes. "Lucian will remain. The royal guard will be doubled. You will not leave these chambers." "I will be safe," she assured him, though a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. "He will not dare to move against you," Kaelin growled, his mind touching hers. He knew she suspected Vorlog as well. He knows what I would do to him. He kissed her then, a deep, possessive kiss that was both a promise and a warning to any who would dare harm her. And then he was gone, a whirlwind of shadow and power leaving the citadel. The first 2 days passed in a tense quiet. Lyra felt watched, a constant prickling on the back of her neck. On the third night, the night Kaelin was due to return, the attack came. It was not a frontal assault. It was insidious. A sweet, cloying scent filled her chambers, a poison meant to dull the senses and weaken a wolf. But it had no effect on her divine nature. It only served as a warning. Her door burst open. It was not Lord Vorlag, but 3 assassins, their faces masked, their blades coated in a substance that shimmered with a sickly green light. Wolfsbane concentrate, lethal to any werewolf. They had not counted on her being more than a werewolf. Lyra didn't scream. The frightened Omega girl was a ghost of the past. She was a queen. She was the Argent Luna. She threw out her hands and a wave of pure silver light erupted from her palms. It wasn't a gentle, healing light. It was a concussive blast of raw power that slammed into the assassins, throwing them back into the hallway as if they'd been hit by a freight train. One recovered faster than the others, lunging at her with a snarl. She didn't retreat. She met his charge, her body moving with the preternatural grace of the dance she'd performed. She sidestepped his clumsy thrust, her hand glowing as she grabbed his wrist. The assassin screamed, a horrifying, piercing sound as the lunar energy coursed through him, neutralizing the poison on his blade and searing his flesh. He dropped the dagger and collapsed, convulsing. The other 2 hesitated, their eyes wide with terror behind their masks. This was not the helpless Omega they had been sent to kill. This was a goddess. From the end of the hall, Lord Vorlag appeared, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "Fools! Kill her! What are you waiting for?" That was the confirmation she needed. The assassins charged again, desperation making them reckless. Lyra felt a surge of cold, lethal power rise within her. Her eyes glowed and the air in the corridor grew frigid. Tendrils of silver energy, like moonlight made solid, whipped from her fingertips. They were not physical, but they struck the assassin's spirits, their very life force. The men cried out, clutching their chests as their connection to their wolves flickered and died. It was a bloodless, terrifying attack. Vorlag stared, his plans crumbling into dust. He had underestimated her. He had underestimated the prophecy. "You," Lyra said, her voice echoing with celestial power as she advanced on him. The assassins were writhing on the floor behind her, their spirits broken. "You dared to defile this house. You dared to threaten your king's mate." Vorlag drew his own sword, its edge gleaming. "You are an aberration, a stray we should have put down the moment you arrived." He lunged, but he never reached her. An apocalyptic roar, a sound that shook the citadel to its foundations, erupted from behind him. The very air turned to ice. A vortex of pure shadow slammed into the hallway, and from it, Kaelin emerged. He was not in his human form. He was a monster of myth, a dire wolf the size of a horse, wrought from living darkness, with eyes of burning gold. His feral rage was a tangible force, a wave of killing intent that promised utter annihilation. He had felt her distress through the bond, felt the threat to her life, and had covered the last 100 miles in a single, impossibly fast run. Vorlag froze, his face draining of all color. He had planned for the guards. He had planned for a weak Luna. He had not planned for the full, unrestrained wrath of the Shadow King. Kaelin's spectral form didn't even bother with Vorlag's sword. A massive paw of pure shadow swiped out, and Lord Vorlag was sent flying down the corridor, his body crumpling as he hit the far wall with a sickening crack. The king's enormous wolf form solidified, shifting back into his man shape in a swirl of shadows. He was before Lyra in an instant, his hands checking her for injuries, his golden eyes blazing with a fury so profound it was terrifying. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice a strained growl. "I am fine," she said, placing a calming hand on his chest. His heart was hammering like a war drum. "I handled them." His eyes went to the groaning assassins, then to the broken form of his cousin. He looked back at her, his apocalyptic rage slowly receding, replaced by that familiar, soul-deep awe. She hadn't just survived, she had won. "Yes," he breathed, pulling her into a fierce, protective embrace. "Yes, you did." Lucian and the royal guard arrived moments later, their faces grim as they took in the scene of carnage and betrayal. Justice for Lord Vorlag and his failed assassins would be swift and absolute. The last pocket of dissent within the court had been exposed and cauterized. There were no more challenges after that. Lyra's display of power, coupled with the king's lethal retribution, solidified her position. She was not just the king's mate, she was a power in her own right, the Argent Luna of prophecy, and she was to be feared and respected in equal measure. 6 months passed. Spring had come to the lands ruled by the Shadow King and the Argent Queen. The listlessness that had plagued the kingdom was gone, replaced by a vibrant energy. Crops grew fuller, the people were healthier, and the oppressive shadows of the past had receded. Lyra's light, her healing touch, and her compassionate rule had brought the balance the prophecy foretold. She stood on the grand balcony of the master suite in the Obsidian Citadel, looking out over the sprawling city and the green lands beyond. The evening air was cool and sweet. A pair of strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and she leaned back into the solid warmth of Kaelin's chest. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured, his lips brushing against her temple. "I was thinking about a girl," she said softly, scrubbing a stone floor, praying to be invisible. Kaelin's arms tightened around her. He could still feel the faint echoes of that pain, a scar on her soul that he spent every day trying to heal with his love. "That girl is gone. She was a diamond covered in dust. I am just the fool who was lucky enough to see her shine." She turned in his arms, her hands coming up to cup his harsh, handsome face. Her eyes, now a constant soft silver, were filled with a love so profound it still humbled him. "You didn't just see me, Kaelin," she whispered. "You knelt." He smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his face. "It was the easiest decision of my life." He lowered his head and kissed her. A tender, lingering kiss filled with the promise of their shared future, their united kingdom, and the new life she now carried within her. The shadows had found their light, the moon had found its sun, and their reign was just beginning. It was a story that would be told for 1,000 years, a testament that even in the deepest darkness, a single spark of hidden light could change the world, proving that love was not just a powerful magic, it was the only magic that truly mattered.